They won't want me to give evidence or anything." "No, dear, it's all arranged." And she patted his hand. The determined front she was putting on it stayed the turmoil in Val's chest, and he busied himself in drawing his gloves off and on. He had taken what he now saw was the wrong pair to go with his spats. They should have been grey, but were deerskin of a dark tan. Whether to keep them on or not he could not decide. They arrived soon after 10. It was his first visit to the Law Courts, and the building struck him at once. "By Jove," he said as they passed into the hall, "this'd make 4 or 5 jolly good racket courts." Soames was awaiting them at the foot of the stairs. "Here you are," he said, without shaking hands, as if the event had made them too familiar for such formalities. "It's Happerly Brown Court 1. We shall be on first." A sensation such as he had known when going in to bat was playing now on the top of Val's chest, but he followed his mother and uncle doggedly, looking at no more than he could help, and thinking that the place smelled "fuggy." People seemed to be lurking everywhere, and he plucked Soames by the sleeve. "I say, uncle, you're not going to let those beastly papers in, are you?" Soames gave him the sideway look which had reduced many to silence in its time. "In here," he said. "You needn't take off your furs, Winifred." Val entered behind them, nettled and with his head up. In this confounded hole everybody, and there were a good many of them, seemed sitting on everybody else's knee, though really divided from each other by pews, and Val had a feeling that they might all slip down together into the well. This, however, was but a momentary vision, of mahogany, and black gowns, and white blobs of wigs and faces and papers, all rather secret and whispery, before he was sitting next to his mother in the front row, with his back to it all, glad of her Violette de Parme, and taking off his gloves for the last time. His mother was looking at him. He was suddenly conscious that she had really wanted him there next to her, and that he counted for something in this business. All right, he would show them. Squaring his shoulders, he crossed his legs and gazed inscrutably at his spats. But just then an old Johnny in a gown and long wig, looking awfully like a funny rattled woman, came through a door into the high pew opposite, and he had to uncross his legs hastily and stand up with everybody else. "Dartie versus Dartie." It seemed to Val unspeakably disgusting to have one's name called out like this in public. And suddenly conscious that someone nearly behind him had begun talking about his family, he screwed his face round to see an old bewigged buffer, who spoke as if he were eating his own words. Queer-looking old cuss, the sort of man he had seen once or twice dining at Park Lane and punishing the port. He knew now where they "dug them up." All the same, he found the old buffer quite fascinating, and would have continued to stare if his mother had not touched his arm. Reduced to gazing before him, he fixed his eyes on the judge's face instead. Why should that old sportsman with his sarcastic mouth and his quick-moving eyes have the power to meddle with their private affairs? Hadn't he affairs of his own, just as many and probably just as nasty? And there moved in Val, like an illness, all the deep-seated individualism of his breed. The voice behind him droned along. Differences about money matters. Extravagance of the respondent. What a word! Was that his father? Strained situation. Frequent absences on the part of Mr. Dartie. My client, very rightly your Ludship will agree, was anxious to check a course, but led to ruin. Remonstrated. Gambling at cards and on the race-course. That's right, thought Val, pile it on. Crisis early in October, when the respondent wrote her this letter from his club. Val sat up and his ears burned. "I propose to read it with the recommendations necessary to the epistle of a gentleman who has been, shall we say, dining, me lud?" Old brute, thought Val, flushing deeper. You're not paid to make jokes. "You will not get the chance to insult me again in my own house. I am leaving the country to-morrow. It's played out." An expression, your Ludship, not unknown in the mouths of those who have not met with conspicuous success. Sniggering owls, thought Val, and his flush deepened. "I am tired of being insulted by you. My client will tell your Ludship that these so-called insults consisted in her calling him the limit, a very mild expression, I venture to suggest, in all the circumstances." Val glanced sideways at his mother's impassive face. It had a hunted look in the eyes. Poor mother, he thought, and touched her arm with his own. The voice behind him droned on. "I'm going to live a new life. M.D." And next day, me lud, the respondent left by the steamship Tuscarora for Buenos Aires. Since then we have nothing from him but a cabled refusal in answer to the letter which my client wrote the following day in great distress, begging him to return to her. With your ludship's permission, I shall now put Mrs. Dartie in the box. When his mother rose, Val had a tremendous impulse to rise too and say, "Look here, I'm going to see you jolly well treat her decently." He subdued it, however, heard her saying, "The truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth," and looked up. She made a rich figure of it in her furs and large hat, with a slight flush on her cheek-bones, calm, matter-of-fact, and he felt proud of her thus confronting all these confounded lawyers. The examination began. Knowing that this was only the preliminary to divorce, Val followed with a certain glee the questions framed so as to give the impression that she really wanted his father back. It seemed to him that they were foxing old bagwigs finely, and he received a most unpleasant jar when the judge said suddenly, "Now, why did your husband leave you? Not because you called him the limit, you know." Val saw his uncle lift his eyes to the witness box, without moving his face; heard a shuffle of papers behind him, and instinct told him that the issue was in peril. Had Uncle Soames and the old buffer behind made a mess of it? His mother was speaking with a slight drawl. "No, my lord, but it had gone on a long time." "What had gone on?" "Our differences about money." "But you supplied the money. Do you suggest that he left you to better his position?" "The brute, the old brute, and nothing but the brute," thought Val suddenly. "He smells a rat he's trying to get at the pastry." And his heart stood still. If he did, then of course he would know that his mother didn't really want his father back. His mother spoke again, a thought more fashionably. "No, my lord, but you see I had refused to give him any more money. It took him a long time to believe that, but he did at last, and when he did—" "I see, you had refused. But you've sent him some since." "My lord, I wanted him back." "And you thought that would bring him?" "I don't know, my lord. I acted on my father's advice." Something in the judge's face, in the sound of the papers behind him, in the sudden crossing of his uncle's legs, told Val that she had made just the right answer. Crafty, he thought. By Jove, what humbug it all is! The judge was speaking. "Just one more question, Mrs. Dartie. Are you still fond of your husband?" Val's hands, slack behind him, became fists. What business had that judge to make things human suddenly? To make his mother speak out of her heart, and say what perhaps she didn't know herself, before all these people? It wasn't decent. His mother answered, rather low, "Yes, my lord." Val saw the judge nod. "Wish I could take a cock shy at your head," he thought irreverently, as his mother came back to her seat beside him. Witnesses to his father's departure and continued absence followed. One of their own maids even, which struck Val as particularly beastly. There was more talking, all humbug, and then the judge pronounced the decree for restitution, and they got up to go. Val walked out behind his mother, chin squared, eyelids drooped, doing his level best to despise everybody. His mother's voice in the corridor roused him from an angry trance. "You behaved beautifully, dear. It was such a comfort to have you. Your uncle and I are going to lunch." "All right," said Val. "I shall have time to go and see that fellow." And parting from them abruptly, he ran down the stairs and out into the air. He bolted into a hansom, and drove to the Goat's Club. His thoughts were on Holly and what he must do before her brother showed her this thing in to-morrow's paper. When Val had left them, Soames and Winifred made their way to the Cheshire Cheese. He had suggested it as a meeting place with Mr. Bellby. At that early hour of noon they would have it to themselves, and Winifred had thought it would be amusing to see this far-famed hostelry. Having ordered a light repast, to the consternation of the waiter, They awaited its arrival together with that of Mr. Bellby, in silent reaction